Okay, so let's get started. So welcome to this ECOP Wednesdays but Friday session where we chat about the European marine science and policy landscape. Yana, could you please move to the next one so that I can introduce the board and the network? Thank you. So first, our housekeeping rules. Please make sure that we can see your name, that you have your microphone muted. You will have the opportunity to speak during the Q&A session, but please keep your microphone off when you're not speaking. You can ask and make comments. You can ask questions, obviously, and make comments in the chat. And obviously, please be respectful. So now I'll quickly introduce the European Marine Board. This event, if you can move to the next, thank you. So these events, the ECOP Wednesdays, are organized by the Early Career Ocean Professional Network of the European Marine Board. The board gathers 37 organizations from all around Europe, and altogether we make marine sciences and policy content, and we work on it all together. So for example, we produce policy briefs targeting funders or the European Commission. And we have an early career ocean professional network that is managed by the Young Ambassadors of the board. If you want, you can apply to become an ambassador if you're interested in linking your marine sciences to policies. And this network, among others, organize these webinars, but also we're working to improve the representation of early careers in this landscape of marine sciences and policies. And today we have the chance to have Quentin Deschandelliers with us. So Quentin, you were an assistant for a deputy at the European Parliament, and you're now still working in EU politics as a lobbyist. And you also are a communicator on EU politics, on EU news and drama. And we can find you on Twitter and Twitch, so you can follow Quentin's content there. And you will, so this event is organized as, first you'll give us an introduction to your work and to the EU and on how we as scientists are getting involved or what we could be doing in the EU world. And so as I was saying, then we'll have a Q&A session where you can ask all the questions you want, so get your questions ready. And now, Quentin, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Juliette, and thank you again for inviting me to this Friday session. I understand you do that usually on Wednesday, so thank you for moving it to Friday for my benefit. So, like Juliette said, so my name is Quentin Deschandelliers. I'm mostly known as the EMB Assistant, Mepassistant, depending on whether you say it in French or in English. I'm a content creator, so today I'm going to tell you a bit about how, as a content creator, I burst the bubble, what we commonly call the Euro bubble, so the Brussels, basically the bubble in Brussels that is focused on EU politics, and how I'm trying to bridge that with the rest of the world, the real world, let's say. So first, I'm going to tell you a bit about myself, and just before to give you a bit an idea, I'm going to tell you I'm going to make a first presentation for about 20 minutes. That's the objective, and then we'll have the Q&A to have a proper discussion and answer all the questions on my presentation or even beyond if there are other topics that you want to discuss with me. So, could you go to the next slide, please? So, what is EMB Assistant? Who I am? So, I'm a content creator. I'm specialized on EU politics at large. So, I'm not, contrary to you, I understand that you are mostly scientists focused on marine biology, marine policy. It's not my territory. I'm saying it very honestly. I'm working on EU politics as a whole, and like Juliette said, I'm also a EU professional. I'm not a full-time content creator. I used to be an MEP assistant. So I used to work in the European Parliament for 6 years and a half, and then I became a lobbyist for now almost 4 years. So as MEP assistant, I've become like one of the biggest content creator in Brussels. To give you an idea, I have gathering about 40,000 followers across the different platforms I'm present, so Twitter, Twitch, Instagram, etc. And my focus is to combine humor and serious explanation to make EU politics a bit more relatable and understandable, particularly for young people who are, let's say, my core targets. So I'm known for various things, for memes about EU politics, but also for interviews with politicians, EU politicians, with journalists, with whoever is a relevant EU actor, to try to make sure that people understand what the EU is about. So that's in short who I am. Next slide, please. So I've been active for about 10 years now, so for a while. So I've gathered a few tips on how to make the EU something that could be a bit more relatable, because I mean, as you may imagine, as people who are not focused on EU politics in general, it's not the sexiest topic at first. It's not the thing you're like, oh, on a Friday evening I'm going to watch something about EU politics. Not really. That's not the gist of it. But I'm trying nonetheless to make it interesting and appealing to people who have nothing to do with EU politics. And for that, I'm using the codes of internet, the language of internet. I'm 35. I grew up with internet. I like to think I have a bit of a sense of humor, so I'm trying to leverage that to make the EU something a bit less serious, or that appears a bit less serious than it actually is, and convey a message. Even if it means to be a bit self-deprecating about and making fun of ourselves as people who are in the Euro bubble. That sounds very evident now in 2023, but like I said, 10 years ago, that was very far from being evident. Even today, even if there's been some progress in the EU institution, that's still there's still more that could be done. Most people imagine EU politics as something like a house of cards, something very serious with plots everywhere, everybody backstabbing everyone in the back, etc. Part of what I do is to actually show or give the idea that actually sometimes EU politics is a bit more like The Office, where things happen and nobody really understands why they happen. It's just part of it. And so I use humor, among other things, to convey in a simple manner complicated notions. In a single meme, I can, for instance, give a taste of what EU politics is about without having to go in a 2-hour conference about the EU institution, the balance of power, etc. I can, in a single image, with a bit of humor, give a key message to people who have nothing to do with EU politics, and make them understand some key ideas, and maybe hopefully get them a bit interested in this and the drama that is a bit behind the fun I'm doing about that. And also that's where I can also talk to people who are experts, so they see all the subtlety of the message and enjoy them, but also interest potentially beginners, let's say, in EU politics. Another key thing that I found works a lot to make EU politics, let's say, more understandable for people, is to create a story. I'm going to give you a very concrete example. When I'm on Twitch, I'm explaining EU politics, I'm explaining the news currently in the EU, in Brussels, what the Brussels is up to. I will not just be saying, okay, I'm just not going to show on screen, okay, this is regulation X, we're going to read regulation X and you're gonna enjoy it. That's not what I do. If I'm talking about the reform of EU fiscal rules, I'm not going to say, okay, well, the rules say that you must have less than 3% deficit, less than 60% debt, etc., etc. No, what I'm going to say is, okay, you have these rules, but they exist within a grander story. The rules do not pop out of nowhere. It doesn't exist as a one thing that pops out of nowhere. It's something that exists within a story that started long before and that will continue long after. So when I'm talking about fiscal rule, I will be talking, okay, I'm going to talk about the Greek crisis. You may remember that back in the day. I'm going to talk about the political fights between the north of Europe and the south of Europe. So in a way, I'm trying to do my best to make sure that when I'm telling people about EU politics, they have the impression that they're following an episode of Game of Thrones, the early seasons, rather than something boring. So that's a bit how I tackle the format, to try to make it interesting. All that while, of course, having fun. Then there's what I call the issue of incarnation. People often perceive Europe, when I say people outside of Brussels, often perceive Europe like fog. They know it's out there, they know it exists, but it's not something palpable. You can't see it, you can't touch it, you don't have a face that says, okay, this is Europe, I can interact with it. So that makes people a bit wary about it. And part of what I do, particularly on the Twitch side of things, when I do a proper explanation about the EU, is I try to act as a bit of a lighthouse, a point of reference, a place people can trust to understand what Europe is about, what Brussels is about, and make them understand what is going on. And so I have to build trust and legitimacy. So I have to explain to people that why am I legitimate to explain them what Europe is. I'm a former Mepassistant. I'm working for 10 years in Brussels, so I know my stuff, and building trust in the sense that that they understand that I'm here to serve them, in a sense that I'm here to explain, but not to sell them something. Which brings me to my next point. Even if I talk about politics, I explain politics in a non-partisan way. I'm not trying to say to people when I'm doing my explanations, oh, you should vote for this party, you should vote for this party. No, I'm saying, okay, I'm doing the explanation, I give the political context, I explain the arguments of as many sides as I can, but I'm not telling them this is what you have to think, this is what you have to vote for. The only, let's say, exceptions to that I'm perfectly transparent about it with my audience is, okay, I remain someone who is pro-European, so I will defend a pro-European view, of course, and I don't play well with the far right, so I'm not going to invite people from the far right on my channel, for instance. But apart from that, everything that I do is non-partisan. I invite people from the right, I invite people from the left. I treat them exactly the same way, and I give the opportunity to people to interact with them and to make their own opinion. And all that, yeah, to be pedagogic and help them understand a bit better the EU and make it a bit more relatable, which hopefully, I mean, has been a bit effective over the past 10 years. Could we go to the next slide, please? So enough talk about me. Let's talk a bit about you. So I understand you are a scientist. You don't work particularly on EU politics. So legit question: why should you care about EU politics? Why are you here in the first place? First, so you work on maritime issues. So I'm going to extend that a bit to environmental policy. And as it happens, the EU is a very, very big player when it comes to environmental policy. The EU is around the world the space that is probably the most ambitious player, one of the most influential player when it comes to acting against climate change and, generally speaking, doing things on the environment. It's also very influential via what we call the Brussels effect. The Brussels effect is the ability of the EU to influence the rest of the world. I'm going to give you a very concrete example. When the EU decides, takes a decision for itself, so let's say something that has nothing to do with environmental law, GDPR, data protection. They adopt rules for data protection within the EU, so for 27 countries, 450 million people. But because the EU is such a big and important market, a big and important place, the rest of the world will copy-paste or use as a reference point what the EU does. And when the EU act as a trailblazer, so the ones that are the most ambitious, the first to move in the space, the rest of the world will tend to copy or use what the EU is doing as a point of reference. So that's what we call the Brussels effect. And so, of course, that makes it even more important on environmental policy, where the EU is taking this role of trailblazer. In your case, on maritime policy, it's good to know that the EU has what you call an exclusive competence. That means that only Brussels can take decision when it comes to the conservation of marine biological resources. Capitals can't do anything without Brussels having a say, so that's interesting for you. And for the past 4 years now, the EU has made the EU Green Deal, so the big package of EU policy on to fight climate change, one of its core policy. Ursula von der Leyen had presented it, saying that it was Europe's man on the moon moment, to show how important it was for the EU. But it's also something that is becoming increasingly controversial. Like 4 years ago, everyone was saying, oh yeah, Green Deal is great. Everybody is on board, whether you're right or left. Now it's becoming a bit more nuanced than that. And it's becoming more and more politically charged as a topic. So I put in the slide the nature restoration law drama. If you haven't followed it, that's a vote that took place in the European Parliament a couple of months ago about a part of the EU Green Deal that is called the nature restoration law drama. And the nature restoration law, the drama came after. The drama came because you suddenly had part of the political spectrum, an alliance of the conservative and the part of the liberals and the far right, to contest the Green Deal, to basically say the Green Deal is going too far. We have to revert back. We have to rethink this whole approach. And so more and more, you're seeing a general backlash around green policies around the EU, both at political level, but also in public opinions. In public opinions, more and more you're seeing reactions in various member states, not only from politicians who are saying, oh yeah, climate activists are annoying, etc., but also the public opinion are saying that, oh, they don't agree with some actions that are taken by climate activists, and they fear that it's going too far. And so more and more you're seeing a political clash occurring around climate policies, which of course would include policies that affect the sea. So your core center of interest. And next year is going to be the EU election in June 2024, and we expect that the topic of environment policy and how to build a consensus around this will be a very, very important part of the debate. So, in a nutshell, why EU politics is relevant to your work and why you should care about it. Next slide. Thank you. So, you're a scientist. How you may wonder, okay, how does my work interact with what politicians do? You'll be happy to know that in principle, EU law is supposed to be based on fact and science. That means that EU decisions must be based on fact and figures. You must be able to justify what you do. So that means that the political cycle for EU decisions should be taken. You will have what we call white papers, which are sort of reports making a bit of a state of play of the science, of the facts, what is the situation in a given field. You will have impact assessment that may quote scientific research. You may have auditions organized by institutions where we have researchers, you may have other people, experts, coming to explain a particular topic to politicians so that they may take into account in their future decision. So generally speaking, research and scientific work is a very useful and powerful source of data and legitimacy for politicians here in Brussels, because we're in Brussels, we're stuck in Brussels, we don't have, let's say, absolute knowledge over everything, so we need outside input, which science can provide through the work that you may carry out, and that gives us legitimacy to then, I say we, people in Brussels, I give them legitimacy to act as they need to do. But you have to bear in mind that it's a role that is very much concentrated in the initial stage of the creation of a EU law or EU policy in general. You have to research comes to justify an action and the course of action, but then you have the political debates that takes precedence. That being said, there is very little direct contact between politicians and scientists. Politicians very rarely will interact with scientists. Assistants will very rarely interact with scientists for very practical reasons, actually. First, the work that you carry as scientists is not something that per se fits the needs of a politician. Why? Because you're making papers, you're making scientific papers that can be very long, very complicated, very technical. A politician does not have the time to dive into a 200-page report that will be extremely technical, that he will not necessarily understand, that will not necessarily have actionable points. So it's complicated for a politician or his team to take the time and make use of the direct output, the things that you produce as scientists. So, like I said, we're nonetheless exposed to science, to scientific works. That mostly come through what I call poeticized means. That means that we have institutions that will take your work or take some of your work and use it to justify what they're doing, which of course is follows a political goal. You will have lobbies, NGOs, etc., that will use scientific work to justify and back what they're saying. And so all this comes through a political lens, because if a document comes from an NGO, someone who is opposed to this NGO will be, of course, a bit wary of what is in the paper, and vice versa. The Commission will use scientific works to justify why the Commission is taking an initiative, but you won't necessarily take into account papers that may not go in the direction that they like, or they may say that actually, in balance, that should be fine. So we are mostly exposed to science through means that are then politicized. And then you have a final layer that makes it even more complicated for you, is that research can itself become a topic of political debate. What do I mean by that? You will have, and particularly in the field of, well, not particularly, but in the field of environment policy, you will have debates about the validity of a research. Is research solid enough? Does it foresee efficiently the consequences of a policy or not? And so you will have battles around, but this paper actually is not something that we should take into account. We should rather focus on this other paper or this other research, or we should redo the entire research because it doesn't go far enough, etc. So there is a fight on the scientific basis of what the EU is doing. And also you have sometimes scientists at large in general that may become how can I say it, part of the political debates. What I mean is that you will have scientists that will take a side. They will take a side and they will become associated to one side of a political debate. And so when you see that person, you say, okay, he's working for that side of the debate, not for the others. He's not, let's say, objective or neutral in the debate. And so that then gives a color to the work he's carrying. Like, for instance, in my work as a lobbyist, I don't, like I said, I don't work at all on issue related to environment, but if I see a paper from some well-known researchers in my field, in many cases, I just read the name and I could write the conclusion of the paper without even reading the paper, because I know that they are strongly associated with one political side rather than another. Next slide, please. So then, how could you, as a scientist, influence politicians? Bear in mind that science mostly intervenes at the beginning of the process, and then it can be politicized. First, you have to understand what a politician needs. Like I said, the traditional paper that you do is not something that is fit for the need of a politician. You need to understand the mindset of a politician. So you need to read what they read. You need to read how they inform themselves. So you need to read Politico, for instance, which is like one of the big newspaper here in Brussels. You need to read the EPRS briefing. So EPRS is the research department of the European Parliament that does like a lot of briefing notes to MEPs, which are pretty well done, I have to say. I quite enjoy them. It's very well done. So this is the things that MEPs will read to have a summary of topics that they're working on, and then potentially act. So if you read that, you may understand the kind of things that they need. You're doing research, write short summaries of what you work on in layman's terms, in a way that people like me, who doesn't work at all in your field, could understand, and possibly at the end will say, I did my work, I did my research. The research says this. What should you do with this? And so you have actionable points, so that politicians can say, okay, I see your points. I will then take the action that you suggest, or not, or adapt it, or take into account. And of course, build up your credentials so that when you arrive, you don't appear as a random guy that suddenly arrives with his paper. Here, read my paper and do what it says. Of course, that doesn't work if you have to be perceived as someone that is legitimate and recognized in your field to be taken, let's say, seriously. I also put a point on maintaining a presence on social media, because social media right now it's very important. I'm not going to explain the obvious, but taking the habit of explaining your work any research on social media is something that can be helpful if you want to influence politicians, because that first, that builds you an audience, that gives you recognition, and that also can be a way politicians get to know about you, because they will see in their timeline on Twitter or whatever, they will see your thread about your research, and they will say, oh, okay, that looks interesting. I'm going to have a look at what he or she is saying. But of course, do that with a specific curation, in the sense that if you want to do that in the objective of influencing politicians, you can't treat your social media as if it was like your personal your personal blog with family pictures and or whatever. You have to curate it in a way so that it's very much focused on explaining what you do and potentially influencing or giving an opinion to politicians. And of course, a final point, just a final point before the Q&A, is work with people who are used to work with politicians. Because like I said, well, no, I didn't say, but I'm going to tell it to you now. Influencing politicians, even if you can do something at your level, it's a job. It requires specific skills, it requires specific knowledge, and you can work with organizations that are specialized on this, or that are active on policy points that may be compatible with what your research should be pointed to. So getting in touch with these people, with these organizations, can be a way to then be in a position to then interact with politicians and potentially influence them. Bearing in mind again that you have to be careful that it can become then politicized, because like I said, if you become too associated, I mean, then it's a decision that you may take freely. But if you want to be perceived as something new, someone somewhat objective or neutral in the debate, if you associate yourself with only one side of the equation, your work will be let's say associated fully to that, and only the people who agree with this position will take into account what you're saying, and not the other side. So it's a fine balance to keep, let's say, if you want to do that. So in very short, that's what I wanted to tell you a bit about explaining EU politics and how EU politics interacts, or not so much, with scientists. Now we can do a bit of a Q&A, and I'm looking forward to your questions.
Thanks a lot, Quentin. That was really interesting.